The sun hung low over the desert horizon, casting elongated shadows that slithered across the sand like serpents. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it a dry, metallic scent of earth and sage. The village, nestled at the base of jagged cliffs, seemed almost frozen in time, its adobe buildings glowing in the golden light of dusk. Life here was simple, dictated by the rhythm of the sun and the occasional unpredictable visit from travelers. Yet today, the quiet hum of routine was pierced by an unexpected stir. From the far edge of the village, a figure emerged, framed against the fading light. At first, she seemed like a mirage, a shimmer in the heat-hazed air. But as she drew closer, the villagers' murmurs grew louder, a ripple of curiosity running through the dusty streets. She was breathtaking, adorned in a wedding gown that flowed like liquid ivory, embroidered with delicate patterns that glimmered in the sunlight. The dress was not merely elegant. It seemed almost ceremonial, resonating with an aura that was both foreign and intimately familiar to the village. Her hair, dark and lustrous, cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes deep, observant, and slightly worry-swept across the crowd as if measuring every gaze, every whisper. Among the villagers, a figure stood apart, cloaked in shadows to spite the sunlight. Known only as the Apache Man, he was a legend whispered about in half-tailies around fires and in quiet corners of homes. A protector, a warrior, a loner, his presence alone commanded both fear and respect. His attire was simple, practical for a life spent tracking the unforgiving land. Boots caked in red dust, a leather vest worn from decades of use, and a scarf knotted loosely around his neck. His eyes, dark and penetrating, held the weight of countless battles and long years of solitude. He was a man who had learned the harsh lessons of the world, and in return, the world had left its mark on him. The bride's approach was deliberate, her steps measured, almost ceremonial. As she drew nearer to the Apache Man, the crowd instinctively fell silent, sensing an unspoken tension threading the air. There was something in the way she moved, a quiet confidence that belied the vulnerability of her delicate gown. It was as though she carried a story only a few could understand, a story written in the very rhythm of her gait. Children, wide-eyed and clutching the hems of their mother's skirts, peeked curiously from doorways. Even the village elders stooped, and lined with decades of desert sun, straightened as if instinctively acknowledging that something remarkable was unfolding. Birds, previously calling and swooping through the canyon, seemed to pause mid-flight, as if sensing the shift in the air, the arrival of a presence that demanded attention. The bride finally stopped a few feet away from the Apache Man, her gaze locked with his, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink to the space between them. She smiled faintly, not the broad grin of familiarity, but a quiet, knowing curve of lips that hinted at secrets long held. In that moment, a hush fell over the village, heavier than any mere silence. There was anticipation, yes, but also a thread of unease, a collective question dangling in the desert air. Who was she, and why had she come now? The Apache Man, unaccustomed to disruption in his carefully maintained solitude, felt an unfamiliar stir within him. It was not fear, nor was it joy. It was a memory hovering at the edge of consciousness, fragile and fleeting, yet stubbornly persistent. The past, long buried beneath years of survival and solitude, seemed to tug at him, demanding recognition. He studied her face, scanning for hints, for a familiarity he could not immediately place. Her eyes held a depth, a reflection of someone who knew the land and its secrets as intimately as he did, yet had lived a life far removed from his own. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying over the sand and wind. "Do you recognize me, Apache Man?" The question cut through the still air, sharp as a blade, and weighted with intent. Heads turned, Breaths were held, and a collective shiver ran through the assembly. The story, the history, the unspoken connection all seemed to hinge on the response that would follow. For the first time in years, the Apache man was not merely an observer of life around him. He was drawn into its current, caught between the shadows of memory and the light of the present. And so, the desert held its breath, waiting for a man whose past and present were about to collide in ways neither he nor the villagers could yet comprehend. The desert seemed to pause, the wind slowing as if to listen. The bride's words lingered in the air, delicate yet piercing. "Do you recognize me, Apache man?" For a moment, the Apache man stood frozen, his rugged features betraying no emotion, though inside a storm had begun to churn. He had faced countless dangers, bandits, wild beasts, even the wrath of nature itself, but nothing in his solitary, disciplined life had prepared him for this sudden, intimate confrontation. Around them, the villagers exchanged nervous glances. Whispers floated like drifting sand. Who is she? Could it be someone from his past? Many had heard the tales of the Apache man's youth, stories passed down by their elders. A boy, spirited and curious, who had vanished from the village under mysterious circumstances. They had grown up with legends of his bravery, his solitude, his ability to navigate the desert with uncanny skill. Yet none had seen the man's heart or the past he carried until this moment. The Apache man's gaze softened, not in recognition but in deep curiosity. The voice that had spoken carried an accent of familiarity, a cadence buried somewhere in the recesses of his memory. The desert sun reflected off the bride's gown, illuminating the delicate embroidery, but it was her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and oddly comforting, that drew him in. They seemed to beckon him, urging him to remember, to connect. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, cautious, almost wary. "I do not believe I know you. Why do you ask?" His words were careful, measured, yet they carried an unspoken challenge. "Prove yourself. Show me the truth." The bride's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. She did not falter, did not shrink under his scrutiny. Instead, she took a slow step closer, closing the small distance that separated them. "You may not remember me yet," she said softly, "but I was your childhood friend. We ran through these very canyons, laughed by the riverbanks, and carved our names into the rocks as if we owned the world. Do you not recall me?" The words landed like a sudden, heavy rainfall. For a moment, the Apache man's mind raced, a blur of memories flashing across the canvas of his memory. He saw fragments. A small girl with untamed hair, sunlight glinting off the river water as they played. He remembered laughter echoing through the canyon walls, the thrill of climbing rocks that seemed impossible, and the whispered secrets shared under the shade of a lone mesquite tree, and then a void. She had disappeared so suddenly, so completely, that the mind had buried her to survive. The villagers sensed the tension, the collision of past and present. Some whispered prayers, others clasped their hands over their mouths in disbelief. Children, sensing the gravity of the moment, quieted their chatter and edged closer, eyes wide. Even the canyon itself seemed to hold its breath, the wind pausing, as if to witness the unfolding story. The bride, reading the hesitation in his eyes, softened her tone. "I know it may take time for the memory to return," she said, "but I have carried it with me every day. You were the boy who promised me we would always find adventure together. That promise. It stayed with me even when I was forced to leave." A sharp gust of wind swept across the village, stirring dust and sand around their feet. The Apache man closed his eyes for a moment, letting the whispers of the past wash over him. Faces, voices, and fleeting moments swirled in his memory, some vivid, some blurred. And then a single truth emerged, clear and undeniable. This woman, Standing before him in radiant white was not merely a stranger. She was a fragment of his own history, a living echo of a past he had thought lost forever. When he opened his eyes, he saw her fully, no longer just as a figure in the sunlight, but as a bridge to a world he had left behind. He inhaled, steadying himself, the weight of recognition settling slowly in his chest. And though he did not speak, the raw, unspoken connection between them pulsed in the desert air, binding their shared past to this very moment. In that suspended silence, the bride took a small step closer still, her gaze unwavering. And for the first time in years, the Apache man felt the stirrings of something he had long forgotten: curiosity, hope, and the fragile spark of trust. The question had been asked, and the answer, though not yet spoken, was beginning to take shape, written not in words but in the unspoken understanding of two souls bound by childhood and destiny. For a long moment, the Apache man remained silent, his gaze fixed on the bride. The desert sun dipped lower behind the jagged cliffs, casting a warm amber glow over the village. Shadows stretched across the sand, twisting and elongating like memories themselves. He could almost hear the echo of laughter from decades ago, carried faintly on the wind, a sound so familiar, so achingly close, that it made his chest tighten. The bride spoke again, her voice gentle, almost as if afraid to shatter the fragile tension in the air. "Do you remember the river?" she asked. "The one at the edge of the canyon, where the water ran clear and cold? We used to chase each other along the banks, splashing, laughing, pretending the world belonged only to us." He blinked, and suddenly he saw it, a small river winding through the canyon, sunlight glinting off its surface like shards of glass. He could feel the warmth of the rocks beneath his hands, the exhilaration of climbing higher and higher with a fearless companion by his side. The memory was sharp, vibrant, and alive. He could almost hear her laughter echoing through the canyon walls, a sound that had been buried under years of solitude and survival. "I remember," he said, his voice low, roughened by emotion he rarely allowed to surface. "I remember the cliffs, the trees, and you. We carved our names into the big rock by the old mesquite tree. I thought I had forgotten. I thought—" His words faltered, caught in the chasm between past and present. The bride smiled softly, sensing the battle waging within him. "I never forgot," she whispered. "Even when I was taken away, even when life forced me to grow up somewhere far from here, I carried our adventures with me. Every canyon we climbed, every secret we shared, I held it close, like a treasure no one could steal." He studied her closely, searching for proof, for the tangible threads of the girl he once knew. Her eyes, he realized, held the same mischievous spark he remembered, the same bold curiosity, the same fearless spirit. The contours of her face, though grown and refined, echoed the child who had once climbed the canyon walls beside him. And in that recognition, something shifted. The walls he had built around his heart, the solitude he had cultivated like armor, began to tremble. I can see it now," he murmured, stepping closer, almost unconsciously. "The river, the rocks, the secret places. We thought we were invincible back then." His lips twitched into a faint smile, a rare expression that softened the hard lines of his face. Memories flooded him, running through the tall grass, racing to reach the river before the sunset, hiding from adults who scolded them for wandering too far. He could feel the excitement, the freedom, the bond of trust that had existed between them, pure and unbreakable. The bride reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm, a gesture of reassurance and connection. "We were invincible," she said, her voice a whisper against the wind. "And that invincibility lives on, in memory and in heart. It brought me back to you." The Apache man swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. The memory was not merely a recollection, it was a bridge, a lifeline, pulling him from his solitude and reconnecting him to a world he had abandoned long ago. In that instant, he realized the truth he had long denied. The past was not gone, and some bonds could never be broken, no matter the distance or time. He looked at her fully. Now, really saw her, and the realization hit him with staggering clarity. This was not just a childhood friend returned. She was a living fragment of his past, a reminder of innocence, courage, and the warmth of human connection he had forsaken. For the first time in years, the Apache man allowed himself to hope, not just for recognition, but for something more profound. The possibility of reconciling the man he had become with the boy he once was, and perhaps of reclaiming the bond that had shaped his life long before solitude claimed him. The desert, once vast and isolating, no longer felt empty. Memories had returned to fill it, and with them, the promise of a shared future, one that began not with the past forgotten, but with the past remembered, cherished, and honored. The Apache man's heart felt like a drum, beating with a rhythm he hadn't known in years. The warmth of the afternoon sun seemed to fade behind the cliffs, replaced by a shadow that mirrored the tumult inside him. Standing there, mere steps from the bride, he was torn between the solidity of the life he had built in solitude and the fragile, rushing tide of memories that threatened to sweep him away. For years, he had walked the desert alone, relying on the clarity of purpose that came with isolation. His days were filled with survival, discipline, and vigilance. His nights, with quiet reflection or the occasional haunting dream of a life never lived. He had convinced himself that solitude was safety, that detachment was strength, and that the past was a land best left unvisited. Yet here she stood, her presence like a mirror held up to the boy he had been, the boy who had laughed freely and dared the world with nothing but courage and a friend at his side. Conflicting emotions waged war inside him. Relief rose first, sudden and suffocating, that she was alive, that the girl who had vanished from his life so abruptly had survived. Then came disbelief, a creeping doubt that perhaps this was some illusion, a trick played by memory or imagination. Could it truly be her? Could the girl he remembered, etched into his heart and mind, have returned as the poised, radiant woman? Before him, anger flared, too, not at her, but at fate itself. Why had she been taken from him? Why had the cruel twists of life scattered them to opposite ends of the world? He felt a sting of guilt, sharp and unexpected, for the years he had spent growing hardened, for the distance he had allowed to grow between himself and the world. He had buried himself in survival, believing it was his destiny to walk alone. Yet he now realized he had also buried pieces of himself, pieces that she had carried all along. The villagers watched, sensing a change in him, though none could know the storm raging inside. Some whispered in hushed tones, noting the rare softness in his eyes, the way his fists clenched and unclenched as he struggled to reconcile memory and reality. Others stared in silent awe, recognizing the gravity of the moment. A man who had long been a symbol of stoicism was being tested by something far more powerful than any desert or enemy he had faced, the truth of the heart. The bride, attuned to his conflict, did not speak for a while. She simply let the silence stretch, allowing him the space to confront his feelings. She understood that recognition alone was not enough. Trust, understanding, and acceptance had to be earned again, delicately, like tending to a fragile flame. Yet her gaze never wavered, steady and patient, holding him accountable for the boy he once was and the man he had become. Finally, he spoke, voice rough with the weight of long-suppressed emotion. I don't know what to say. I thought I had left the past behind. I thought solitude had made me strong. But now, Now I feel like a boy again, lost in memories I thought I had buried." His words hung in the air, heavy and vulnerable, and for a fleeting moment the desert itself seemed to lean in. Listening, her hand lifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if to reassure him without breaking his fragile armor. "You are still you," she said softly. "The boy you were, the man you became, they coexist. And we don't have to choose between them. I came back so you wouldn't have to face your past alone." His chest tightened. Relief, guilt, longing, and love all collided in a single overwhelming pulse. The conflict was far from resolved, but something fundamental had shifted. He no longer felt entirely alone. The desert, vast and unyielding, seemed less like a cage and more like a stage where past and present could meet, where memories could walk hand in hand with reality. The Apache man exhaled, a long, steadying breath, and let the tension ebb slightly. Though he was still unsure, still wary of the torrent of feelings she had unleashed, a flicker of hope ignited within him, a quiet acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, reconciling with the past was possible, and that opening his heart again was not a weakness but a return to the life he had once known. And in that silent desert moment, with the bride standing mere steps away, he realized that his heart, long disciplined and guarded, was beginning to soften, willing to feel, willing to remember, and perhaps willing to trust once more. The Apache man studied her carefully, the lines of his face softened yet tense, sensing there was more behind her radiant composure. He had felt the pull of memory and recognition, but he knew there was a story she had yet to tell, one that carried the weight of years and untold suffering. The desert around them, so silent and vast, seemed to lean in, waiting for her words, the wind carrying the weight of anticipation over the canyon walls. She inhaled slowly, as if gathering strength from the air itself before speaking. "When I was very young," she began, her voice tinged with both sorrow and resilience, "our village was attacked. Fires, smoke, chaos. Everything changed in an instant. Families were scattered. I was taken away, sent far from here for my safety. I thought I would never see you again, never walk these canyons, never hear the river or the wind through the cliffs." The Apache man's jaw tightened, a mix of anger and helplessness stirring within him. He remembered the chaos, the fear, the sense of powerlessness as the village had been torn apart. He had searched, hunted, and survived, but she had vanished, gone without a trace. He had thought she was lost forever, swallowed by the desert or by fate. And yet here she was, standing before him, alive and whole. "I was raised elsewhere," she continued, her eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of remembered tears, "in a place far from these lands, far from the people I knew. I learned new customs, new ways, but I never forgot you, or this place. Every night I would close my eyes and imagine the river, the cliffs, our secret cave. Those memories, they kept me alive, gave me courage, and guided me back here." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, betraying the years of pain she had carried silently. The Apache man's own memories of loss, the helplessness, the nights spent searching, the endless solitude collided with hers. He realized with a sting of guilt that while he had survived, he had also mourned her without truly knowing if she had endured. "You carried it all these years?" he asked, his voice rough, almost incredulous. "All this pain?" "For me?" She shook her head gently. "Not just for you. For the girl I was, for the bond we shared. I needed to remember where I came from, who I was, and the friendship that shaped me. And in remembering, I knew I had to return not just for myself, but for the life we once promised each other." The Apache man swallowed hard. The desert seemed suddenly heavier, the air thick with unsaid words and the weight of survival. His mind wandered to the countless nights he had spent wandering these canyons alone, haunted by shadows of the past. and memories of the friend who had vanished. He had buried his grief beneath duty, solitude, and discipline, but her words unearthed it all: the longing, the regret, and the loneliness he had carried like a second skin. She stepped closer, her presence steady and unwavering, bridging the gap not just physically but emotionally. "I know it may take time to trust again," she said softly, "to believe that what we shared as children could survive everything we've endured. But I am here now, and I am not leaving, not without you." His heart, long hardened, softened slightly under the weight of her confession. He realized that her return was not just a reunion, it was a reconciliation. She had survived, endured, and returned, bearing the scars of separation, yet carrying the same spirit and courage he had. Remembered. Her pain, her endurance, her unwavering commitment to the past, they demanded acknowledgement. And in that recognition, he felt a swell of emotion he had not allowed himself in decades. The desert wind rose again, sweeping through the canyon, lifting dust and carrying the scent of sage and sand. It was as if the land itself exhaled in relief, echoing the quiet understanding that had passed between them. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing hers, a silent acknowledgement of shared pain, of memory reclaimed, of a bond renewed. And in that touch, fleeting yet electric, the Apache man understood something profound. The hidden pain they had both carried, his of loneliness, hers of separation, was no longer a burden to bear alone. Together, it could be faced, honored, and transformed into something stronger: trust, reunion, and the fragile hope of what might come next. The desert seemed to hold its breath, as though it too understood the delicacy of the moment. The Apache man studied the bride, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in quiet, careful scrutiny. Words alone could not erase decades of absence, nor could memories alone prove truth. He needed proof, tangible evidence that this woman was truly the girl who had once run beside him through the canyons, laughed by the river, and shared every secret only children dared keep. "I need to know," he said finally, his voice low and steady, "that you are who you say you are, that this isn't just a dream or worse, a trick my mind has played after all these years." His gaze held hers, unwavering, though beneath the surface was a ripple of hope. Fragile and tentative dot, the bride met his eyes without flinching. "I expected nothing less," she said softly. "I know it is not enough to say I am the one you knew. Words can be false. Memories can be mistaken. But there are things only we would know." Her fingers instinctively traced the edge of her gown, a small grounding gesture, before she lifted her hand and gestured toward the cliffs that framed the village. "The cave," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "the one behind the waterfall, hidden among the rocks. Do you remember the mark we carved inside? The one shaped like the crescent moon with our initials beside it?" The Apache man's breath caught. A long-forgotten place, secret and sacred, surged in his memory like a sudden wave. He could see the waterfall, the way the sunlight hit the mist, the cave concealed behind a curtain of water and stone. And yes, the mark. The crescent moon, etched deep into the rock, intertwined with their initials, a silent testament to their childhood pact, their unspoken promise to always return. To that place, to always remember. "Only we knew that," he murmured, his voice thick with awe and disbelief. "No one else could have known, not even the elders." Her smile was gentle, tinged with relief and hope. "Then you see," she said, stepping closer, "I am the girl who ran with you, who laughed with you, who dreamed beside you. That cave, that mark is proof of what we shared, and proof that I never stopped remembering you." The Apache man reached out instinctively, brushing his hand over the carved initials as though feeling the memory itself beneath his fingertips. The grooves were worn by time, yet unmistakable. The moon, the letters, the bond they represented. His chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel completely unguarded. The proof was not just in the mark, but in the pulse of memory that ran through him, the laughter, the shared adventures, the connection that had survived separation and time. Tears threatened the corners of his eyes, though he blinked them back, unaccustomed to showing vulnerability. "It really is you," he said finally, his voice low and filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "After all these years, you came back, and you remembered." She nodded, a tear glinting in the corner of her eye. "I remembered everything," she said softly. "Even when life took me far away, even when I had to become someone else. To survive, I never forgot you or this place. You were my anchor, even when we were apart." The Apache man exhaled slowly, feeling a tension within him dissolve. The proof was undeniable. The hidden cave, the carved mark, and the flood of memory converged into something more than recognition. It was a bridge between past and present, a tangible reminder that their bond had endured everything life had thrown at them. For the first time, he allowed a faint, genuine smile to touch his lips. "Then, I trust you," he said, quietly yet firmly. "Not just because of the mark, but because I see you here, standing before me. You are real, and you've returned." Her hand found his, warm and steady, a physical acknowledgement of trust accepted and reciprocated. The desert seemed to exhale with them, the wind carrying the scent of sage and earth over the canyon, as if celebrating the reunion. In that moment, the past, once distant and fractured, became whole again, and though the journey of reconnection was far from over, the first step had been taken. Trust had been earned, proven, and sealed, not through words alone, but through memory, courage, and the undeniable truth of a shared past that neither time nor distance could erase. The Apache man stood in the shadow of the canyon cliffs, the desert wind stirring dust and sand at his feet. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, this woman who had returned from the past and carried it within her like a living flame. The proof of her identity, the carved crescent moon and initials, had settled the doubts, yet the weight of years apart pressed heavily on both of them. Memories had been revived, but feelings had yet to catch up fully. She took a careful step. Closer, her hand extended, as if bridging the gap not just between them physically, but between the boy he had been and the man he had become. "I came back for us," she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. "I couldn't let the past stay buried. I needed to see if what we had, the bond we shared, could survive the years. Could survive everything." He swallowed, the dust of decades settling in his chest like a stone. For years he had wandered the desert alone, carrying grief, solitude, and anger as his companions. His identity had been forged in isolation. Strength had been measured in distance from others. Yet now, standing before her, he felt the fragility of that life, the emptiness he had accepted as natural. She had returned, and with her, the reminder that he had once been a boy full of laughter, dreams, and trust. The memories surged again, climbing the cliffs, racing along the river banks, hiding in the cave behind the waterfall, sharing secrets only they would ever know. He could see the boy he had been, see her hand in his, see the joy and innocence of a friendship untainted by the hardships of the world. And then he looked at the woman before him, the grown version of that childhood friend, and realized that she carried all of that as well. She had survived, endured, and come back stronger, but still the same at heart. "I never stopped thinking about you," he admitted, his voice rough but sincere. "Even in my solitude, even in the years I spent wandering these canyons, I wondered. What became of you? I never expected." His words faltered, the weight of longing and disbelief choking him. "I never expected you would return." She smiled faintly, her eyes glimmering in the sunlight. "And yet I am here," she said. I remembered everything, the adventures, the laughter, even the arguments we had over the silliest things. And I remembered you, even when the world tried to make me forget, you were always in my heart. Something within him shifted, a softening of the armor he had worn for decades. The anger at the past, the guilt over years spent apart, the fear of vulnerability, all of it began to dissolve, replaced by a tentative warmth. The bond that had existed in childhood, fragile and secret, now reasserted itself in the present. He realized that his solitary life had been a prison of his own making. Her return had thrown open the door to reconciliation, connection, and the possibility of love. "I don't know if I can be the man I once was," he said quietly, "but I know that the boy I was, he would be glad to see you again. He would. Be proud that you returned." She reached out and took his hand fully this time, fingers entwining. "The boy you were lives in you," she said gently, "and the man you've become. I want to know him too. Not as a legend, not as the Apache man others speak of, but as you. As the friend I knew, the boy I loved, and the man I hope to share a future with." The wind rose again, scattering sand and carrying with it the faint scent of sage and desert flowers. The canyon walls seemed to echo their shared laughter, a sound long silent, now renewed. He felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: trust, warmth, and the fragile, exhilarating possibility of hope. Finally, he nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture that carried more weight than any words could. "Then, let us begin," he said. "Not as the past, not just as memories, but as something new, together." Her smile widened, radiant and comforting, and together they stepped forward, leaving behind the ghosts of separation and the isolation of years. In that reunion, the Apache man found reconciliation not just with her, but with himself. The boy he had been, the man he had become, and the bond they shared now coexisted in harmony, bridging the chasm of time with trust, memory, and a quiet, unspoken promise of what was yet to come. And in that desert canyon, under the glow of the setting sun, the past and present finally met, allowing both of them to move forward together into the uncertain but hopeful horizon. The desert lay bathed in the warm, golden hues of the setting sun, painting the cliffs and canyons with streaks of fire and amber. The village, once quiet and still, seemed to breathe in unison with the two figures standing at its edge. The Apache man and the bride childhood friends reunited. Hearts reconciled faced the horizon together, a bond forged in memory, tested by time, and strengthened by endurance. For years he had walked the land alone, guided by survival and solitude, a man defined by his own silence and resilience. But in her presence he felt the first stirrings of something he had long forgotten: the possibility of joy unburdened by loss, companionship untainted by duty, and love unconfined by fear. The past, once a shadow that had haunted him, now stood beside him as a living reminder of what had shaped him and what he could still embrace. She looked at him, eyes shining with a mixture of hope and reassurance. "We've carried the past for so long," she said softly, "but now we have a choice. We can let it define us, or we can walk forward together into what comes next." He nodded, feeling a lightness in his chest that had been absent for decades. The weight of solitude, the endless desert journeys, the years spent haunted by memories, all of it seemed to lift in that moment. He realized that strength did not come solely from isolation, nor courage only from survival. True strength, he now understood, could also come from opening one's heart, from trusting, from letting someone share the burdens you had long carried alone. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally, without hesitation. It was a gesture simple and yet profound, a silent promise that they would face the future side by side. The Apache man, once a figure of solitude and legend, felt the comforting warmth of connection radiate through him, a warmth he had long denied himself. The village around them seemed to come alive in subtle ways. A bird lifted from the sand. In flight, the wind carrying whispers of sage and desert flowers, the faint laughter of children echoing from doorways. Even the cliffs, silent witnesses to years of history, glowed with a soft, approving light, as if acknowledging that the old wounds of the past were finally beginning to heal. "We can start anew," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Yet she heard it clearly, not just the past remembered, but the future we choose to live together. She smiled, a radiant expression that seemed to illuminate the desert itself. "Together," she agreed, her voice steady and warm. And so they stepped forward, side by side, leaving behind the echoes of separation, the shadows of fear, and the long years of solitude. The canyon walls framed them like silent guardians, and the river, their childhood witness, sparkled faintly in the distance, reflecting the fading sun. The land itself seemed to celebrate their reunion, carrying the promise of a life renewed, a story rewritten in trust, memory, and love. In that moment, the Apache man understood that life was no longer a solitary path to be endured, but a journey to be shared. The girl who had vanished and returned had not only rekindled old memories, but had also awakened something far deeper, the courage to embrace hope, to reclaim the joy of connection, and to step into a future unafraid. Hand in hand, they walked toward the horizon, the desert stretching endlessly before them, a canvas for new adventures, shared dreams, and a love that had survived the trials of time. The past had returned, the present had reconciled, and the future awaited bright, uncertain, and beautifully theirs. And for the first time in years, the Apache man smiled fully, a smile no longer shadowed by solitude, but illuminated by trust, love, and the promise of new beginnings.